Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another Supatease video. And in this one, I will be constructing my PvP tier list for patch 10.0.7. I had made my prediction, and now the game has been out for a week. We've seen some adaptations and some changes from the designers, as well as just players in terms of the meta and which specializations are looking the most desirable. So this tier list is going to be important for you in making the decision in terms of what specialization you want to pick based on performance to go after some of these limited edition rewards that are going to be phased away once the second season of Dragonflight begins. So it is very important in this final stretch that you're going over after what's going to be giving you the best odds. And if you want to make sure that you're staying up to date with content like this, news related to World of Warcraft, then do make sure to hit the subscribe button. Your support is greatly appreciated. But let's get started here. I've broken this tier list down into a lot more segments so that it's not as easily like everything is on the same tier. And I've got a new tier set both at the top and the bottom with F and with God tier for this one specifically to try and get a better and clearer idea of what's going on in terms of strengths of specializations. So the first one here is the Affliction Warlock. The Affliction Warlock is actually getting some pretty big nerfs coming in on Tuesday. The one main advantage of Affliction is that you have some curses that prevent enemies from critically striking, which is really important against burst damage like Retribution Paladins and Hunters at the moment, and you have dispel protection against some of the spam dispel mechanics that are currently available in the game to some specializations. Unfortunately, you only have one school of magic, and you can be really easily shut down. This is a specialization that is not for beginners. While I think that you can make it work, I do think that it has some pretty heavy counters, things like Fistweaver Monk, which are really popular at the moment, and even Resto Shaman can be really difficult to get momentum against. So for me, I think Affliction is probably coming in more on the A tier at the moment as opposed to S or even close to God tier, just due to its obvious weaknesses, but it does have some positives. With the nerfs coming in, maybe it falls down to a B. Kind of have to wait and see. Now we've got Arcane Mage here. Arcane Mage, it's still okay. I think the main advantage of being an Arcane Mage is your ability to kite a lot of these prevalent melee DPS. You have powerful crowd control effects like Polymorph to deal with Fistweavers currently in this meta, but with how popular Resto Shaman is and how powerful Resto Shaman is into casters, it's probably going to become increasingly frustrating, and your synergy with Rogue is a lot less noticeable because Ret Paladins just completely destroy you and they're so popular at the moment. I'm a little bit torn as to whether to say it's A tier or B tier at the moment. I think right now probably A tier is a safer position. I still think that it's got a lot of strengths to it, a lot of burst damage, and just high mobility to avoid a lot of the melee attackers. The next one is going to be the Arms Warrior. For me, I think Arms Warrior currently is S tier. It synergizes really well with a lot of classes and enables them. Sharpened Blade is one of the few mechanics that's going to cut through a lot of the available hybrid healing that's currently in the game. Your matchups that are really preventing you from getting into God tier are things like mages and hunters that can really kite you and avoid you. I think that does kind of hold you back from being a godlike specialization, but it's a really solid pickup at the moment. Definitely highly synergized with a lot of other specializations. Assassination Rogue, this is a spec that I gave really high rankings in my prediction tier list, but I think has fallen off quite heavily. And I do think this is because of Retribution Paladin's durability and their popularity. They're pretty much in every game. You're almost never not going to see a Rep Paladin, and their toolkit is just completely counter to rogues. So much so that Assassination is really falling off hard. I would honestly say maybe it's like B, maybe pushing down to C. Somewhere in here, just because of the popularity of Retribution Paladins. Beast Mastery Hunter, this is a very easy S tier. I'm debating whether or not it should go on to God tier, but I'm really kind of only saving that for a very few specializations. Beast Mastery Hunter is just doing insane, unstable amounts of damage. Very easy to play, very easy to climb. Number one recommended spec in my prediction tier list. Still my number one recommended spec if you're looking for something really easy to pick up and try and get a couple of these PvP rewards before the season is over. Demonology Warlock. This is one where I think I'm going to put it onto God tier. I think that Demonology Warlock, one of the main reasons it's so powerful at the moment is that it doesn't have any dots that can be dispelled from Judgments of the Pure on a Retribution Paladin, so your damage is not staggered out that easily because of it. Tyrant is doing a remarkable amount of damage. You have an insane amount of control overall on the game. It's a really frustrating specialization to fight against. Honestly, I think it's safe to say that Demonology is God tier. I think it's even better than what I had predicted for it initially in comparison to Destruction. and mostly just because its ability to combat Ret Paladin's ability to dispel. Every other caster is really having a hard time. Destruction Warlock, I think this is a solid S, maybe possibly pushing God tier with Demonology here. The only reason I'm not putting it there is, again, Dispel from Ret Paladin is going to be putting it a little bit behind. And pretty much every spec that we're talking about in this tier list, it's going to be in comparison to Ret, because it's like how well can it combat it, or how well does it synergize with it. Overall, it's just a remarkable amount of damage, multiple schools of magic, so it's going to be a really decent pickup overall. But I would say that it's a little bit lower than a God tier still at this point, although really close. Devastation Evoker. This is one, again, it's still just complete hit or miss. I honestly just want to put it here. I do literally just want to put it on F tier. You either one-shot somebody or you are just doing nothing. It's a really sad state. But unlike Ret Paladins, you're not immortal until you land one of these one-shots. So your game is probably going to end before you get to it. Again, maybe we'll throw it up on C, because like you can roll the dice and win, but it's in a really tough spot. I'm really hoping that they do a retuning on specializations like Devastation Evoker to get it away from this type of gameplay, because I think it's frustrating for the person who plays it if they're getting unlucky, obviously, and frustrating for the enemy who, if they're getting unlucky, it feels seemingly out of their control for the match. So it's a really sad state, in my opinion, for Devastation Evoker in terms of tuning for PvP, and I think its performance will likely show that to you, and that's why I'm ranking it lower. Discipline Priest. Okay, the healers are going to get tough. I think I might save the healers for last, honestly, because the healers are really tough in terms of locking down. Elemental Shaman, I gave this a really high ranking initially, but I actually think it may be falling off a bit. And one of the main reasons I think that Elemental Shaman is falling off is because of Judgments of the Pure on Ret Paladin. This honor talent really should just be removed from the game. It was not designed around Retribution Paladins having 2 charges of Judgment and such a low cooldown on it. Every time they judge, it removes a magic effect, and your Flame Shock just doesn't exist. And you're going to see a lot of Ret Paladins. They're still doing a remarkable amount of damage even with that, honestly, but yeah, I think you fall a little bit short, and it's mostly just because of how neutered you are. Same thing for mages. Your polymorphs being removed, you just basically don't have crowd control. The entire game is just really getting messed up at the moment because of the mechanics with that honor talent and how the new Ret Paladin rework works. So Ellie's definitely falling off as a result. Enhancement, this might be one that is going to come as a bit of surprise, even just after my own personal experience, seeing some other players. It does a remarkable amount of healing. It does the most healing of any DPS in the game, easily the most healing of any DPS in the game, and it has high burst potential, which synergizes well with the strong classes in the game. So I actually think that Enhancement is in a decent position at the moment. I would say that it's actually an A tier specialization. You can come to my stream if you want to argue me about it, because I'm currently playing it and looking to push as high as I can with it. But I've been really enjoying my time on Enhancement and doing pretty well in my lobbies consistently overall. So I actually think Enhancement is in a really good spot at the moment for 10.0.7. Feral Druid, this is a tough one. Do I think it's an S tier specialization or an A tier specialization is really kind of my question for this specialization. I think it's probably still an S tier. I think that jungle is still a really good composition. I think it still does a really good raw overall amount of damage. It's not completely destroyed by the Judgments of the Pure, although, you know, with Lunar Inspiration, maybe your Moonfire is being removed is going to be a bit frustrating. But I think that its raw output, synergies with Warrior and that type of deal, it's still going to be put into a really good spot for this patch. Main advantage over Enhancement is going to be mobility. It's the main problem for Enhance is getting kited by hunters and stuff like that. And mages, you're just not going to be able to connect. Feral's not going to have that problem. And you have limitless healing because your healing is not restricted to mana like Enhancement. So I think it's a fair assessment to say that Feral is higher than Enhancement for PvP. Now, Fire Mage, again, with the Judgments of the Pure for polymorph, your overall damage not really being remarkable. I think that fire is probably falling off a bit in terms of this meta. I'm not sure if I haven't really even seen much of it at the higher ends of the ladder. Seems like it's been falling off more and more. It doesn't have the same amount of kiting utility that Arcane or Frost has to do with melee attackers. It's definitely fallen off a bit here, in my opinion. Frost Death Knight, you guys got a 3% damage nerf coming in on Tuesday. Still really bursty class. If you can group enemies together for that one shot. Kind of similar to Devastation Evoker in that regard, though, where like if you're not one-shotting them in that window, you're really not doing too much. I think unlike Evoker, you've got more survivability, though, so it's probably going to come in a bit higher than Evoker, but this is lower than my prediction was for it as well. I thought that was going to synergize a lot of these classes, but Ret Paladin has really just been completely deciding that what the meta is for everything, so I think Frost is likely going to be falling down down to more of an average position as a result. Frost Mage, I give this one a really low ranking in my prediction, but after seeing it play out, I think it's one of the few specs that can kind of kite some of these melee attackers, and you synergize really well with Demonology Warlock, which is the god tier. So either you want to be the god tier spec, or you want to be the god tier spec's best friend, and that's usually going to be putting you in a really solid position. So for me, I think Frost Mage is likely A tier. It's really close with Arcane. And mostly the thing that's holding it back is the spam dispel and not being able to use polymorph. Like Mage is just not in a good spot because of that. Fury Warrior, unfortunately, you're still not an arms warrior. While your damage is comparable, I've seen them popping up every once in a while. I don't think your burst is fitting or synergizing as well with the other classes, so you're probably falling off a bit. I don't know if I want to put it on C or B. Like, are you a fire mage? I feel like you're not really a devastate. Maybe it's like this or something like that. Fury Warrior, like, again, you're going to probably have a higher win rate as devastation. It's really tough to say between whether Fury or Devastation Evoker are the worst spec. This is honestly where the debate is coming in. I think consistently with Fury Warrior, you're going to see more success because you're not relying on gimmicks, but your overall power is much lower than the rest of the specializations, so it's going to be a real struggle. Whereas Evoker is complete coin flip whether or not you're going to be able to climb on the ladder. So do with that what you will. These are really close to being both the bottom is all that really matters. We're going to put the healers here to the end because they're the hardest ones. Demon Hunter, definitely an S tier specialization, still just really well synergized with every other class in the game. Tons of damage, tons of support, really, really solid spec. Can really not go wrong with this one. It's still remaining in a remarkable position. For me, Marksmanship Hunter, I think, is still an S tier specialization, probably somewhere close here towards the end of it in the S tier. You just do an insane amount of damage. You're just going to be running people over with burst damage. You synergize really well with Ret Paladins and how much damage they're doing. And yeah, it just does a lot of damage. This is the main reason why Marksmanship is so high up on this list here. Balanced Druid, similar to Elemental Shaman with spam dispel on your dots, is really tough to get pressure. You still do a decent amount of damage. You're going to feel really good in solo shuffle. Demon Hunter Boomkin is a really good comp at the moment, but I think it's probably more like A tier alongside Ellie as opposed to S tier, mostly just because of Ret's ability to remove your dots and slow down your damage. But Cyclone is a really good tool because it doesn't get dispelled, so you can kind of get around the Judgment Dispel mechanic with Cyclone. So you can find burst windows in that, but I don't really think the AoE build is going to be very good for it. Mistweaver Monk, we're just going to punch this over here while we start looking at the rest of the DPS specs. We've only got a couple left here, some very important ones that I know some people want to know where their ranking is going to be ending up. Outlaw Rogue, it's really fallen off. I think you're better than a Fury Warrior, but Outlaw Rogue is just not able to keep up with the burst damage or the survivability, and Ret Paladin is completely dumpster rogues with Sanctuary for your kidney shots, and the fact that the Rets aren't really a target anymore means you can't go after them, which means they're always sanking your kidneys. Really tough spot here for Outlaw Rogue, in my opinion, on this patch. Retribution Paladin, best spec in the game, god tier specialization, just insane synergy with everything, remarkable damage, remarkable survivability, honestly even remarkable mobility and extra range. You're able to really stay connected to things that I wasn't even expecting you to be able to stay connected to. And Judgment of the Pure Honor talent either needs to be completely redesigned or removed from the game, because you are completely deleting some specs by being able to just spam Dispel with a very low cooldown multi-charged Judgment. Yeah, you guys are running the game, you guys rule it, and kind of like Demo Warlocks are your sidekick in terms of power and potency right now on this patch. Subtlety Rogue, I gave this a really high ranking on my prediction, but again, I think it's fallen off, and this is mostly due to the fact that Demonology and Ret are both kind of counter specs to sub, and they're both, bordering immortality, so you can't really kill them, and you can't kill their partners because they'll always help their partners. I think this is honestly holding Subtlety back. It's probably still an A tier spec, probably towards the end of the A tier. Just because of how much damage you can do in a bomb or a shadowy duel. But with the toolkit and these specs hampering you as a rogue, it's going to be really tough to see success. Shadow Priest, same type of deal. Your dots getting spam dispelled, it's going to really hold you back. You still have Psyfiend, which is a really good tool for reducing incoming healing on the target. Still have really good instant CC. That's basically all you've got going for you because of the spam dispel, preventing your damage. I think you're probably still in A tier. You're probably still in the mix here. It's probably more like this, Shadow Priest, Ellie, and you should read the tier list like this. The best of the A tier is on the left, moving over to the right. Best moving over, until we get to the bottom. Survival Hunter, your traps getting dispelled. You do decent damage, but with your traps getting dispelled by Ret, I personally have not even really seen a lot of Survival Hunter. You're really outshined by Beast Mastery and Marksmanship, so it's probably a solid spec. but you're not really going to see it played. And I'm tempted to like say it's like B, maybe low A, somewhere in here, just because like I don't see it at all, and I could see it really frustrating with your dots being spam dispelled. On Holy Death Knight, you do a decent amount of just overall damage and overall pressure. You're certainly not going to be like the star of every lobby, but you have decent synergy with a lot of classes. You're not going to be able to keep up with the burst, unfortunately, of a lot of other specs. So when you get like Warrior Ret in a lobby or something like that, and you're a DK, you're going to get cut down pretty fast, is the main problem for it. So it's probably, again, low A, high B, in my opinion. Maybe I feel like you're probably better than a lot of these specs, though. So maybe like middle of the A. Somewhere in here. Windwalker Monk, same type of deal. You're going to be really squish to a lot of the burst damage, and there's a lot of stun lock that can stop your burst, and spam CC that can really hold you back. And honestly, I feel like your defense is so like low against a lot of these classes that I'm actually kind of tempted to give it a pretty low ranking, even though I usually do give Windwalker quite a high ranking. I think you're going to probably experience a lot of frustration with the amount of one-shot potential that a lot of these, you know, S tier, God tier specs can do, and can prevent you from connecting to their targets. That actually I think enhancement might be better than Wind. It's really close, and this is maybe my most controversial decision for the DPS. But again, like this line between high B and low A is really tight. Preservation Evoker, I think that this is a solid healer, but your mana is a problem. So if we organize this, so how do we organize this based on melee? Let's organize it based on melee versus ranged. That way it's just easier to understand a little bit like what's going on in terms of overall potency of these classes, as opposed to having them just like all over the place. That's about right. We'll put Fire Mage over here on the left. Okay, we've got melee ranged. Oh, yeah, that's right, because ranged here. Ranged here, melee here. Okay. Preservation Evoker, your mana is the main problem, but you have decent cooldowns, decent damage output. You're a really solid healer. Mana's, if you didn't have mana problems, I'd say you're God tier, but I do actually think you're S tier. Resto Druid, I think with Spam Purge and the new talent tree rework, that it's not fantastic. From my personal experience, I think in ranked threes it gets better because you can drink, but in solo shuffle it's not. I think it's probably more just kind of low mid B, or like high B, no, low A. Mistweaver Monk, actually let's just put it here so the healer's on the end. Mistweaver Monk with Fist Weaving is S tier, but again, it's going to feel really strong into some builds and then really weak into others and not really feel viable, so preventing it from being God tier, but it's really close. Resto Shaman, same type of deal. I think that this is actually the best healer in the game. Maybe it makes more sense to say that Preservation and Mistweaver are A. I think Mistweaver is better than Preservation, mostly because these classes don't and they have really good healing output at the moment. This one is A tier because it runs out of mana, but has higher damage output, decent position. I think that makes more sense. Discipline Priest, similar to Preservation Evoker, maybe a little bit better than it overall in the ladder. Mana going to be a problem for it, but it has decent output, good cooldown trades for burst damage, good synergy with the strong specs as well. Holy Paladin, again, much like Resto Druid, I think it's probably going to be struggling currently in this patch. And Holy Priest is a really tough one just because it's like not as popular as other specs, because I don't actually think it's that bad, but it's definitely not a Resto Shaman, it's definitely not a Mistweaver Monk, so maybe it's probably safe to say it's like middle down here somewhere, with Holy Paladin being in the last position for healer. So when we look at this tier list, if you're watching here at the end of the video, if you're on the left of this tier, it means you're the strongest. So Ret is the strongest God tier spec. Destro is the strongest ranged. Demon Hunter, or maybe Warrior. Maybe Warrior is the strongest melee on the S tier. And then in the A tier, Shadow is probably the strongest of all these options, with Unholy Death Knight being the strongest A tier. Strongest range B is Fire, well, you're the only one here. Strongest melee is Windwalker, and then Outlaw, Fury, and then Devastation Evoker on the bottom. You can see it's really close. It's a tight race. Honestly, the God tier specializations are kind of ruining the fun for everybody else. And I know a lot of Ret Paladin players are like, well, it's our time in the sun, you know, just let us play. But things like Judgment of the Pure are just mechanically ruining the experience. You just can't play the game as a lot of specs because this mechanic interaction wasn't designed around this intent, with Judgment being such a low cooldown, that I think like more has to change in order to allow a lot of other specializations to feel more on a competitive footing, because it's really just the Ret show still at this point. But I hope you enjoyed this tier list. Hope it's got you up to date in terms of what's going to be a good option for you. Maybe it's piqued your interest in some specializations, or maybe fallen off for other ones. But other than that, thank you very much for watching the video, and I will catch you in the next one.